Well, Charlie was born in a pretty rough neighborhood in Evansville. It was a place called Baptist Town. It was a segregated area near the Ohio River. Charlie always had an entrepreneurial spirit about him, even as a small child. He would shine shoes, and he would set up his shoe shine stand on the corner of the Benninghoff Nolan Company, and that was an automobile sales and shop. A lot of times Charlie would be sitting outside the garage, and he would always hear the sounds before he would ever see what was going on. He got to learn some of the mechanics, what that particular problem was, and so he began to be able to diagnose these kinds of automotive problems by ear. They said, you know what? Why don't you come in here and start working and learn the ins and outs of the car? And man, he took to it like a fish took to water. He had an opportunity early on in his career to have exposure to some of the mechanics that were working at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Right about the same time he was starting to learn about this was 1923, 1924, there was a business association that was starting up called the Colored Speedway Association. And so Charlie said, you know, I wonder if I couldn't, you know, be a participant in that. Went to some of the junkyards, went to old auto heat places, and just started pulling parts of different cars together. Charlie was building his own car from scratch with, you know, a carburetor from a Duesenberg and, you know, the seats out of a Ford. And when he was all done with it, it was just this weird sort of combination car. But man, the thing could fly. So the Colored Speedway Association comes up with their first event in 1924. Charlie was actually not a part of that race. He was not a part of the inaugural race. So by 1925, it had earned the title the Gold and Glory Sweepstakes. By golly, by the time that name was on there, guess who was at the top of the list of drivers to be entered? Charlie Wiggins. And he's like, okay, now I'm ready, and I'm ready to go. And I mean, by the time he took off, I mean, he literally and figuratively left everybody in his dust. But every year he had a different Wiggins special. He was actually evolving the industry as he was building new race cars every year and making them stronger, faster, better. And that's something that white drivers and black drivers all very much appreciated and respected. The thing that makes Charlie's story particularly interesting is that he was garnering a lot of interest from Bill Cummings, Wild Bill Cummings, who won the 1934 Indianapolis 500. So Cummings says, well, you know, why don't you come on to my Indy 500 race team? Well, that lasted all of about 5 minutes before the AAA comes down on Bill Cummings and says, you know, no, you can't have a chief mechanic who's black. So Cummings, rather than just take no for an answer, says, well, you know, Charlie, can you come be one of my mechanics in the garage, but we can't label you as a mechanic. So the only thing he could go in as an official hired person at the Motor Speedway at the time was to be a janitor. But when Bill Cummings won the Indianapolis 500 in 1934, Charlie was one of his chief mechanics working on that race team. 1936 Golden Glory Sweepstakes, again held at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. Riding cars on a dirt track at the time was a pretty brutal experience to be a driver, because you're hitting all kinds of potholes and you're trying to do it at 80 or 90 miles an hour, and you're eating the dust of the people in front of you, and you're trying to navigate where you can't see very well. So when the green flag drops, all the cars take off, and it's just this giant dust storm. And several laps then into the race, Charlie was in a pack right up near the front. A couple cars spin out, lose control, and then nobody can see, you know, the catastrophe that's in front of them because of all the dust. And so Charlie ends up becoming involved in a 13-car pileup that is horrific. I mean, they were convinced Charlie was dead. Somebody found Charlie's body. He'd gotten thrown from the car. He was out in the infield, and he was just lying there unconscious. And he was alive, thankfully, so there was only one hospital downtown Indianapolis that would accept African-American trauma patients. Charlie does end up making it out. He survives the horrific accident after many hours of surgery. They had to amputate his right leg at the knee, and he lost all his vision in his right eye. So he comes back from this horrible accident, goes out into his woodshed when he gets back home from the hospital, carves out his own wooden leg, straps it on, and goes back to work in the garage, and does so for the next 40 years until his death in 1979. You know, this guy is this kind of quiet hero, but he's just undaunted in his spirit. So there must have been something, even though he would not openly speak about it all that much, but he clearly had it burning inside him the whole time.